I want to say thank you to Sydney for reading that section of the Bible for us. We're going to be looking at that in just a few moments at a greater depth. But I want to start by asking you a question. Have you ever been surprised by someone? And this is what I mean by that. And I kind of got to fill this question in for you a little bit. It's kind of like you listen to a radio announcer and you listen to that person for years. You get to know their voice, you get to know who they are, and you begin to create a picture in your mind as to who they are and to maybe what they look like. And then after a number of years of getting to know this person, you kind of meet them. You bump into them at a coffee shop where you live, or you see them at a function and you kind of go, what? This picture I have of this person doesn't line up with the person that you're looking at. The voice in the picture, it just doesn't line up. A number of years ago, my wife and I, we were on a cruise with some friends. And when we arrived at port, there was some confusion. And so there was a massive lineup. And we get in the lineup, and if you've ever experienced this, you know what it's like. You're going into the queue, right? And you're like passing each other back and forth, back and forth. And as we were getting closer to where the line actually turned a corner and went down another section, we could hear a voice. And the voice was giving direction. It was a very interesting voice. The person was so funny. Like literally, people were laughing hysterically because the person was just hilarious. Here's the thing. When we turned the corner, we were shocked. See, the person that was yelling instructions and having fun had a vest on and had a walkie-talkie and had a wand telling people where to go. It was a high-pitched voice. And if I was a betting man, I would have bet that it was a woman. When we turned the corner, I kid you not, it was the biggest man I've ever seen. It was a riot. And if you could have seen my face, or even my jaw, or the emoji with the eyeballs really big, I was shocked. And what was even funnier was everybody else in that line was experiencing the same thing. And it was hilarious. And this person was awesome. And we were all high-fiving this guy, and it was just really cool. You know, I was thinking about that as I was thinking about our conversation that we're entering into over the next number of weeks. See, we're starting a brand new series called I Am. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be taking a look at 7 I am statements that Jesus gave about himself. And what I'm so excited about this series over the next 7 weeks is that this series is, I'm hoping that it's going to, and I'm praying that it's going to surprise you. Like you're going to be turning the corner every Sunday going, wow, I had no idea. And I think this is important for every single one of us. See, it doesn't matter if you are a person that has very little church experience or none, or you have a notion or an idea of who Jesus is, or maybe you've grown up understanding who Jesus is. My hope is that this series will create that what moment, that turning the corner and seeing who he is. Listen, it's not a secret that the central figure of the Christian church is Jesus. We know this. We understand this. Matter of fact, Vital Point Church, we believe that it is absolutely essential. It's vital for your life to understand what it means to have a relationship with God through the person of Jesus. Matter of fact, we believe, and what the Bible teaches, not just because what we believe, it's what the Bible teaches, is that Jesus is the one who restores us into a right relationship with God. He is the one that makes us right with God. We're going to celebrate Easter next Sunday. And I hope that you will join us at 10 a.m. online, Facebook or YouTube. We have our YouTube account as well, our YouTube channel. But it's this understanding of the central figure of who he is. That's what this church is about. We are doing this so that you might know who he is, that you would begin to understand more of the picture of who Jesus is. That's what our church is about. And we love journeying with people as they begin to understand the fullness of what that looks like in a personal way, but also in a relational community way within the context of our church. Now, let me present this thought to you, though, about Jesus that I've been thinking a little bit about recently. See, I wonder if many of us like the idea of Jesus and the notion of Jesus, but really don't know the person of Jesus. Think about that for a moment. It is very possible that you love the idea and the notion of who he is, but you don't know him personally. You know, we all know, I shouldn't say that. The vast majority of us would say something like this. We would say that Jesus was a fascinating person. Like, he was interesting. So, for example, you might look at his storytelling ability, for example. Like, Jesus could tell a story. I mean, his stories were so fascinating. People came from everywhere to hear them. Crowds would gather. You could maybe be fascinated, intrigued by his teachings. Like, his teachings were pretty awesome, right? So how to deal with anger, how to deal with worry, how to forgive others. Those teachings are really, really important. Or you might be drawn to the miracles. Like, they're super impressive, right? They're super amazing. And we kind of go, yeah, that is so incredible. It's possible that you're just only drawn to the idea of who Jesus is and the notion of Jesus because of those particular things. And you miss out on who he actually is. It's kind of like this. It's kind of like a young couple that loves the idea and the notion of marriage, for example. They date for a long time, and maybe they move in together and they share a house under the same roof. They share the same bed. They share, the same table, and they want the benefits of marriage, but they don't actually take that step into the marriage relationship or the covenant of marriage. They like the idea and the notion of it, but they're not prepared to do the I do's, or they're not prepared to say, until death do us part, those type of aspects of a vow that someone gives and enters into the covenant relationship. It's kind of the same idea. Now, what is so fascinating and what I love about the section that Sydney read for us is that this is exactly what is happening in John chapter 6 of what is going on with the crowd of people that are gathered around Jesus. Now, let me fill this in for you a little bit. Prior to the readings that Sydney did for us, there's some very fascinating moments that are happening. So, Jesus has just fed 5,000 people. Now, it's not just people. Actually, they only counted men back then, and so it's actually probably about 15 to 20,000 people, some of the theologians would tell us. And this moment is incredible. I've actually been to the location of where Jesus did this in Israel. It's a fascinating spot. What Jesus did in this miracle of feeding these people was he took 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish that the disciples took from a little boy who was the only one that was prepared for a long day with Jesus. So kids, if you're listening to me and your mom and dad tell you to pack your lunch, better pack your lunch because you never know who's going to want to use it. So Jesus takes this bread and he takes this little bit of fish and he feeds 5,000 people, and there's leftovers. I mean, this is just mind-blowing for everybody. Now, what's interesting is there's a little bit of a pause in there because they're on one side of the Sea of Galilee, and then they're going to go to the other side at the nighttime, and the disciples are on the Sea of Galilee, and there's a storm comes, and they're afraid, and then Jesus comes walking along on the water, kind of freaks them out a little bit. They're scared. He gets in the boat, all good. They get to the other side. That's for another conversation. The crowd, they follow Jesus. They want more of Jesus. They're intrigued by what he has done. They're fascinated at the idea of who Jesus is. And what's interesting is this dialogue begins to happen in John chapter 6 that is so fascinating between the crowd of people and Jesus. See, they want Jesus to perform some more miracles. They want what is referred to as, they wanted to do the good works of God. See, they wanted the benefits without really knowing who he was. But then something fascinating happens. They bring in some stories from their ancestors. They bring in Moses and this stuff called manna. Now, this is an awesome moment because this is a turning point. Classic Jesus moment. He's going to turn it back on them in a second. But what they do is they say to Jesus, like, listen, Moses provided us with manna, and God, so Moses provided that for us. But then in the midst of the conversation and where we're headed with Jesus saying, I am the bread of life, is that he says, no. Moses didn't provide that bread for those people or that manna. It was God that did that. Fascinating, isn't it? That it was so easy for them in the stories that were passed down from generation to generation, they missed out on what God was actually doing in the provision of the manna. Now, this is where it gets super exciting. As Jesus says these things, let me read it for you. In John chapter 6, verse 32 again, Jesus said, I tell you the truth, Moses didn't give the bread from heaven, my Father did. So he's redirecting their eyes again. He's capturing their minds. He's trying to capture their hearts. And then he says, and now he offers you the true bread from heaven. Oh, he's switching it on them. And then he says this, the true bread of God is the one who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. Now, these people are getting a lesson on who God is and what Jesus was about. He says to them that God is now going to offer them a different kind of bread that is from heaven. Not a bread that sustains life, but a bread that actually gives life. Somewhere in their thinking, this bread was the external aspect of the manna, and Jesus is saying, I'm going to give you a bread that is going to be something that you can internalize and bring about life. This was fascinating for them. They were beginning to get a better picture that Jesus wasn't just about having the benefits of the notion and the idea of who he is. He was offering something even greater. And then he says, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never be hungry again. I am the bread of life. I am. Fascinating moment for us. Jesus is actually drawing on something else that was going on in their past when they understood the stories of Moses. When he said, I am, they were able to connect it almost instantly to the conversation that God had with Moses when God was asking Moses to go and deliver God's people from Egypt. Because one of the things about Moses was that Moses, he questioned God. He didn't think that he was the person that God should be using to deliver his people. And he says, on what authority do I go? And God said to Moses, say, I am has sent you. All of a sudden we begin to realize that Jesus is showing who he is as God. Interesting moment for us. We can track this right back to the beginning of the book that we're looking at, this letter John, this Gospel of John. In John chapter 1, it says that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And then a little bit farther down in that first section of John, it says, and the Word became flesh. So we begin to catch a picture of who Jesus is, that he is God in the flesh. Other writers would say that Jesus radiates the very glory of God and the character of God. If you want to know God, you look at Jesus. You want to know where God is in the midst of storms? He's right there. If you want to know what God's compassion and mercy and love looks like, you look to Jesus. He's painting a picture. He's giving us a very clear picture. It's that aha moment. It's that, what? He's actually God. But then he connects it to his life, to something so incredible, something common, something everyday, something that is available to everybody, and it's bread. Now, I got thinking about bread. When I was a kid. My mom made bread when I was a kid growing up. And I'll never forget my mom making the bread, and I'll never forget the smell of the bread in the house. Just take a moment. Just take a moment, close your eyes, and imagine the smell of bread. Now, if you've got some allergic reaction to bread, think of something else. Sorry. But most of us are like, we're drooling right now, right? Because we can smell the bread. It just smells so good. I remember when we got a bread maker, and my mom would put the ingredients in, and this thing would spin, and I'd go off to school, and then I'd come home, and the house would be filled. What was even better about the bread, honestly, was when we cut it and it was warm and we put molasses on it as a kid. I'll never forget it. It was so incredible. Jesus takes a common everyday experience for them, and he says to them, I am the bread of life. I am the bread of life. There's something very fascinating about this moment for us that I think that we need to pay attention to. Is that this crowd of people, were drawn to Jesus. They really were. The miracles and the things that he was doing and the teachings, they were just drawn to him. And they were drawn to him not from just a religious aspect or cultural religious ancestry or whatever it might be, or Moses and manna and all that kind of stuff. I think there was something deeper. I think there was something deeper in the crowd. That they longed for something inside, that they realized that the lives that they were building were still left empty. And there was something about Jesus that was pinging on the inside of them that drew themselves to him. See, I don't think the crowd is any different than us. I don't think the crowd is any different than you or any different than me. We all have this inner longing, right? We're searching for peace. We're searching for peace in our hearts and our souls and our minds. Think about right now what we're going through. We all are going through this together, and we're searching for something. We're searching for hope. We're searching for answers. We're searching for solutions. But even before this is how our lives were built. I mean, think about marketing companies for a moment. What do marketing companies do? They draw on your need to find inner peace. And so they tell you that your life will not be happy unless you have their product. Consumerism was on the rise because, and it's so easy now, we can just do it from home and it's delivered to our door the next day in these little boxes that have smiley faces on them. It's amazing. Or we look for experiences to give us that peace. We compile them on top of each other, and we believe that these things, and now what's happening is, for many of us, is that's all stripped away for many of us. Now we've got the time to look inside and go, where is my peace coming from? Where is this thing that actually gives me life? See, we're going through this season right now where we must ask ourselves, is the pursuit of the past manna the thing that's ultimately going to satisfy us? Or is there a different kind of manna available to us today that will actually give us life? Because we recognize that there's something missing. See, like the crowd, we often fall victim to the belief that it is the external things that will give the satisfaction of the internal life. But here's the problem. When we are internally muted, there is nothing external that will unmute and give you life apart from Jesus. I want to say that again. When we are internally muted, there is nothing externally that will unmute the internal longings that only Jesus can give. Jesus says, I am the bread of life. And this truth means that he is the one that satisfies you internally and eternally. Amazing when you think about that. When you begin to realize what Jesus is saying is that Jesus is saying that I am the bread of life. I am the one that will bring life internally and externally. I love John 6:47, a little farther down from what was read for us. It says this, I tell you the truth. Jesus is speaking here. In my Bible, it's red in the writing. That means Jesus is saying this. I tell you the truth. I'm not holding anything back. I'm not pulling any punches. I'm making it as clear as possible. I tell you the truth, he says. Anyone who believes has eternal life. See, there's the aspect of the bread giving us eternal life. Now, this is going to take a turn for us, so just stay with me. Just stay with me. Because this section of John, after verse 47, takes an interesting turn. And it helps us with the internal aspect of this. Okay? So Jesus then begins to talk about his flesh and his blood, which for the listeners, it was a little bit strange, and even for us, it can be a little bit strange, but I don't want that to distract us. Because what Jesus begins to do in this moment, he begins to paint a picture of what he was about to do, but he draws on the past. See, for these people, they brought up Moses and manna, but they would have also known the story of this thing called the Passover. A death angel was going through Egypt, killing the firstborn of Egypt. And what God required of people was to sacrifice an animal and put the blood on the doorposts of their homes, and the death angel would pass over. And when God's people were finally delivered, they would celebrate the Passover meal that would paint a picture of that moment when they were delivered. There was also an aspect of this that was important for them to understand from an Old Testament perspective under the Old Covenant, where sacrifices were made, where blood was shed for the forgiveness of sins. And they would do this, and the priests would do this on a somewhat regular basis. And what Jesus is doing in this moment when he talks about flesh and blood is that he paints a picture of what he was about to do with his life. We're going to celebrate this next week at Easter. We're going to celebrate the empty tomb. But Jesus' body would be broken. He would be nailed to a cross. He would go to a tomb, and he would walk out of the tomb conquering sin and death, which means the bread of life gives life to us. Isn't that the most beautiful message we could ever hear? That the offer that Jesus gives to us is this offer of life because he is the bread of life. Now listen. A piece of this is so interesting because what Jesus does in this section is he uses the word believe in this truth. We've got to talk about that for a moment because this is going to be life-changing for some of us. The word believe here is not simply just the intellectual belief of who he is, the notion or the idea of him. The word believe is actually this idea of placing our trust in Jesus. Another way of looking at it is placing our trust on Jesus. Think about the chair you're sitting on right now. I know some of you are lying in your bed watching this, but just think about sitting on the chair you're on right now. You're in your PJs, you're relaxed, you got your coffee, and you sat in that chair. Now listen, you sat in that chair because you believed it was going to hold you up. You didn't intellectually go, I would like to see the plans for this chair to make sure that it was constructed properly so that I can sit on it. You sat down. You trusted it. Yes, there is a process of learning who Jesus is and getting a better picture of who he is and all that. But there comes a point where we are called, we are asked to believe in the truth of who Jesus is, the person of Jesus, putting our life on him, and he becomes part of our lives so that we can become unmuted and give us life and life to the full. See, right now, we're all trying to make our way through what we're experiencing right now. We've been given a gift of time. And yes, the circumstances are not ideal and they're not good. I get that. But I've been talking to people. I've been spending time on Zoom calls and FaceTimes and phone calls, and I'm hearing and seeing in the eyes of many of where's our hope? What do I put my faith in? What do I put my trust in? And today, at the beginning of this brand new series, I hope that you've kind of turned the corner. And you've turned the corner like I did in that queue, getting on that cruise ship and seeing a person standing there that I was like, what? Maybe today, that's you. And you're like, I had no idea. I just was intrigued by who he was. I'm interested in the notion of him, the idea of him, but I've never known him to be who he said he was. And maybe you're hearing this for the first time, or maybe you're watching this on replay and repeat, or maybe you've heard this message a million times and you've fallen into the trap of the notion and idea of Jesus and forgetting to get to know who he is. I want to do something for us before we make a transition to our closing song. And I'm gonna do something for us. I'm gonna put my phone number on the screen right now. This is my phone number. And I'm gonna give you a prayer. This is a prayer that you can pray. There's nothing magical about it. There's nothing, like that about it, but it's a prayer that comes from the heart. And it's a very simple prayer. It says, Jesus, today, by faith, I place my trust in you. I believe you are the bread of life. Just say that prayer right now. By faith, believing. Today, by faith, I place my trust in you. I believe you are the bread of life. If you have said that prayer for the first time, I want you to text me. Text that number on the screen. That's my personal number. You can text me. And then what I want to do is I want to walk with you. I want to present an opportunities for you to grow in this amazing relationship that you've just entered into with Jesus. See, sometimes we just got to get to that place where we make the decision, where we say the I do. And maybe that's you today. So as we go to this closing song, I would love for you to text me. And when the service is over, I'll come back and I'll say a few things, and then we'll go from there and I'll begin the conversation with you. Listen to this song.